start by asking each of you, what does it mean to your business when you think about that? When you think about the possibilities with this kind of connected technology, how does that affect how you do your job and just bring everyone here into your world? And we'll start with you, Harmit.
Sure. So hi guys. I'm sure you're familiar with our brands. If not, we'll get to that soon. But to the question of connection, I think for a company like ours that's been around for 169 years, this is critical to our future. Let's start with that. It's the way consumers shop today. They have they want a digital experience. They want to pay digitally. It's how our internal employees, want to work. Especially the millennials and the Gen Zs, and our other stakeholders. There's also ESG is important to us. It's important to drive sustainable practices across. And so for us, it's both push from the top as well as need from the bottom. And it really starts with that. We've added technology expertise at the board level. The CEO talks about this. I talk about it. The CIO reports into me. For the last 15 years, I've had the CIO report into me. It allows me, as the CFO, to help allocate resources across the board. And I think the pandemic has made a huge difference. It's accelerated digital transformation in a big way, and has allowed us to differentiate ourselves and compete a lot better. I think, my friends will talk about it, but ensuring we're investing in technology just not because it's the latest shiny object, but because it is connected to your strategy and drives an outcome is critical. And I think, the C-suite plays a big role in ensuring that happens.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great question. And the first reflection I have is COVID. Thank God that didn't happen 15 years ago. Where would we have been? The
Right.
Connectivity enabled us to, I think all of us, to actually continue. Over 80% of Ericsson folks went home that day, and we kept everything going. Didn't miss many deliveries, and innovation continued, right? So it's like it has really enabled business continuity in all sorts of ways. Another example from our home turf is manufacturing. We are building our newest factory, have built our newest factory here in US, in Texas, and all connected with 5G to have these robots and these actuators in everything and sensors connected over 5G and automated with AI, meaning that we can onshore. All of a sudden, we can have production in US at a good economy, right? Because automation, and we can onshore. This is the first time actually since 2G days that anybody has volume radio production in US because of these technology enablements, right? So those are two things, and the last thing, which is maybe closest to my heart, is sort of what innovation we can do on top of what we already have, and then we're coming into kind of metaverse. I mean, my pet project at our lab here in Santa Clara is to enable virtual reality and augmented reality with very lightweight glasses and having all the processing in the cloud. But then, of course, you have to have very, very efficient network, low latency network, because when you move your head, the picture has to come, well, information has to go to...
You don't want to get sick.
Yeah, you don't want to get sick, and it has to go there, you have to render the picture, has to go back within 20 milliseconds or so. And that's the state of the art now. We are doing that every day with different partners in the lab. That's just one example on how connectivity changes other industries and enables completely new use cases that we didn't even think about a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so our connectivity journey really is so closely intertwined and driven by Chevron's overall core mission to provide more affordable, reliable, and ever cleaner energy solutions around the world. We're a 140-year-old company where we have a long-standing history of innovation and technology, because if you think about where we're located, right, we operate in locations and a variety of geographies that are often remote, that are undeveloped, where there's no technology infrastructure whatsoever. And so some examples of those places are things like our deep water wells offshore in Nigeria or the Gulf of Mexico, the Permian Basin in Midland, Texas, and for me specifically, it's our ships that sail around the world across our oceans. And so in order for us to do and execute on our value chain, to be able to explore, produce, transport, as well as refine our energy products, we've had to really invest in connectivity and lean into emerging technology in order to operate both reliably and safely.
Take us behind the scenes of a Chevron ship. Like, how's the ship been changed, in the last few years to have that connectivity so that it can be more efficient, so that you can deal with some of the pressures of the supply chain? What's different now?
So it's a really fascinating business if you kind of think about what the maritime industry is like. We all take for granted what it's like to work in an office or what we call a shore-based environment. You can't really emulate that type of technology environment on a ship. As Jan mentioned, right? Sometimes we have issues of latency, we have bandwidth issues, and sometimes there are just basic coverage issues. But in spite of that, right, we're continuing to optimize the network that we do utilize, and we're still trying to take advantage of emerging technologies. The advancement in connectivity, as most of us know, has really driven a convergence between information technology and operational technology. That's allowed us to influence physical operational assets more than we've ever had before. And so as a consequence, we're able to take advantage of things like real-time monitoring. We're able to automate critical processes more strategically. And we're also able to...
Take us behind the scenes of what that is.
Yeah.
You're talking about like the actual mechanics of the ship. You're talking about the...
Right. So I guess a good example would be one of the programs that we're maturing and developing is something we call the connected vessel. We're able to take data from various systems across our ship, from various pieces of equipment, things like our diesel engines, things like our power generators, our propellers, and having access and visibility to that information really guides us in terms of some of the decisions we made around operational efficiency, cost efficiency, how we do our inventory on our ships. But also, I think more importantly, it's also allowed us to be able to understand and view fuel consumption. It's allowed us to understand how we manage our speeds, as well as even do things like anticipate congestion at ports and berths, so that as we understand those various factors, it allows us to actually have a lower carbon footprint in addition to being able to operate more efficiently.
So interesting. Harmit, you also work in an industry that is historical, right? Apparel, like maritime, you work in a shore-based environment, we should say. And what has been some of the growing pains of moving your organization culturally in that direction?
Sure. It's taking some of the older habits that you've grown up with and converting them to new habits. Okay, so let me give you an example. So the jean I'm wearing, this is probably a lot darker when it's first created. Mm-hmm. And so Harmit wants something that's a little bit more faded. Sarah may want something which has what we call holes of distress. So what is the traditional way of doing this? And this industry has done it for years. Till we came and pioneered a new technology. So, and most of our manufacturers is overseas. So you'd have folks who would take some sandpaper and they'd fade the jean. Or you'd have folks who create the holes of distress. So what we said is, okay, now that requires chemicals, not good for you. And it takes a lot longer. And in this industry, you've got to think of trends a year later. So, we're making stuff already a year down the road because our designers are thinking through, okay, what is going to sell a year later? So what we came up with is using lasers with algorithms that are designed, my IT team helped, design some algorithms. So what we did was we said, okay, if it's darker and you want to fade this, can you use a laser machine to fade it? If you had to distress it, could the laser do it for you? But the idea was, let's reduce, potassium permanganate, which is not good for you. That's how the idea came across. And so we started with that. We researched it. We came up with an algorithm that could do it. So if Sarah wants to have a different kind of a look and feel, she can go and say on an iPad, this is what I like. That is fed through an algorithm into the laser machine, and the product is this happens now in 90 seconds versus 20 minutes. And what we can do is, rather than think about a year ahead, we bring the blanks into our DCs now in the US. And if there's a trend that's happening, we're able to quickly react to the trend and create those machines. The other good thing about it is when we started doing this, is we opened it to the consumers, and consumers want to design or customize their own product. And suddenly, using the data, we realized people are trending towards a certain style. And said, okay, that is the style. Okay, so let's start gravitating to it. So that needed a cultural transformation. Our designers are not used to this. Our manufacturers are not used to it. So we had actually spent 6 to 9 months bringing people across and saying, okay, folks, this is a new way of doing things. This is the benefit, okay? And got people across the board, but it had to start at the top. You had to invest in laser machines. And then you had to take a period of time to convert, our customers, the large retailers, our vendors overseas, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually is a major change, and culturally takes a long time.
And then you don't have to have people working in close proximity during a pandemic, which, Jan, you mentioned that has been so critical for this last 2 years, to have this connectivity, to have these processes in place. I've heard executives say to me that the world has transformed maybe 5 years faster than it would have because of the pandemic. I don't know if you agree with that, Jan. Do you feel like we've accelerated in adoption of new connectivity, or does that mean there's a slowdown ahead, or does that mean that people will continue to accelerate their adoption of such technology?
Well, it certainly helped a lot these 2 years in terms of adoption of everything from Zoom to Teams to working remotely and mobile, all of that. So most of that will stay, and most of that maturity will, of course, continue to push ahead. And we are investing ourselves, of course. But we are sort of a producer of connectivity. That's our main business, and then we are, of course, a consumer of connectivity as well. So to drive our own innovation within our own business. So as a producer of connectivity, we see that the speed of the need for more and more and faster rollouts of technology is increasing all the time. 5G is rolled out much faster than 4G was, 4G much faster than 3G was. That's of course good for business, and we kept investing in our techno leadership to take advantage of that. But we also made use of that technology in our own operations, right? For example, in our managed services, going from a very manual-driven operations to much more AI and automated, and having connection points everywhere in our installations made our efficiency go up tremendously. So I think that is seen throughout all businesses. What you're telling here is telling the same story. I must just I must just comment here. Okay. 179 years, 140 years, 146 years. This is an amazing panel of companies that have innovated themselves throughout the generations. I think it's pretty cool, and that's also sort of the big transition now. Every industry will have to do exactly this now in this digitization journey. So it's a very cool experience.
I'm curious, and what our table mate brought this up as we were just chatting before this panel. As you look at the market right now, as you look at the way the way equities are trending, the way people are worried about inflation, they're worried about the supply chain. How do you still make those choices to invest in the future? What is the most important place to put your money right now? And how do you balance it against those pressures of growing the business as it is? Maybe this is a good question for a CFO to tackle first, but actually...
Sure. No, it's a great question. We had our investor day last week in New York, and we laid out 5-year targets with strategies. Because you have to think long term. First, you've got to think long term. Don't worry about, you have to worry about the next quarter, but think long term. I'd say the way we think about allocating resources, whether it's capital or people, it's about, okay, what's the outcome you're trying to drive? But it's also about agility. One of the things that has really made a difference in the pandemic for us is, being an organization that's been around for a long time, we should take our time to get things done. We should come up with an idea, test it, make it perfect, then test it further, and then launch it. It should take us a year or 2 years. But I think the pandemic changed a lot. My phrase is, let perfection not be the enemy of good. And if you're starting from scratch, that's in your DNA. If you've been here for a long time, you want to be perfect. And so what we have tried to do now, whether we've, as we've launched shipping from store, we're not relying on the DCs, or you can buy online and pick up in the store. Those things would take us a year or 2, to line all the pipes and get everything perfect and make sure. Now we can do it a lot faster. So I think agility is something that we've incorporated in our DNA. A lot of folks, I'm sure folks here have made that difference. But what I would say is if you have to allocate capital and resources, think longer term and drive outcomes faster. I think that's the big one. We just talked about it in our investor day. We've got 5-year targets, okay? And I think, our view is we'll get there.
And Janet, there was another component to this, which is you want to think about the even bigger picture than your company. You want to think about the environment. You want to think about governance. You want to think about adopting technology in a way that is sustainable. How does Chevron's transformation in that sense dovetail with your tech adoption? You talked about emissions because you can track shipping in a more efficient way and fuel efficiency. How do you invest in that going forward?
So I actually think it's quite complementary. One of the commitments that our CEO made to our shareholders, and it's a strategy we have, is lower carbon, higher returns. And so operational efficiency, right? How we operate in a manner that really prevents loss of production, that keeps keeps us producing, as well as some of the technologies that we're utilizing to really drive that lower carbon sort of initiative. Those are things that are now so embedded in the work that we do, and similar to what Harmit said, right? We have a lot of capital discipline where any investment really has to have a clear business value, and it has to align with our strategies, and it has to be something that really supports what we do as an energy company. And so if you think about our remit, right, as a company, economies, they want more affordable fuel, right, and energy. Countries want more reliable energy. Society wants cleaner energy. And so if we're looking at Chevron Shipping, for example, as we are trying to operate more efficiently and in a more lower carbon manner, some of the, I think, consequences that address some of the broader issues are things like the reduction in transportation costs. They are things like lower CO2 emissions, right? So it's really as straightforward as that sounds, trying to align to our strategy, and the tactical things we do within our organizations are just very complementary.
I'm going to pivot to questions here. Thank you all for your questions. How are edge technologies being leveraged to balance cloud compute power and latency? This may be a good question for you, Jan.
Yeah. Well, there are two things with edge, right? Either you want to move things from your central cloud to the edge, or you want to move things from your device to the edge or into the cloud. What I talked about VR and processing is about the latter, right? Offloading things from the device so you can do more. But it can be that you cannot have everything centralized, also to move things out, so you have lower latency from the user to the actual processing of whatever it is, the inference of your AI engine or whatnot out in the regions. So edge is super important, but to me, edge is like it's one of the component. Edge plus connectivity is sort of one thing together, right? If you don't have low latency over the network, it doesn't help with edge. So you need to do both.
And in the middle of the ocean, how do you solve that issue?
Yeah, so we sometimes joke that, of our owned and operated ships, we have 30 floating data centers, right? But we have been also exploring technology that allows us to sync when we are close enough to a network and we're not experiencing some of that network connectivity distress. We have a way to make sure that the information, right, continues to flow. So we also, as Jan mentioned, use a balance of both.